Welcome back to Stream Media West 2023. We moved from our usual spot to a spot for Norsk, and it's this cute little fellow here. So
it is indeed.
Dr. Adrian Roe, tell me what Norsk is.
id3as is the company behind Norsk. I'm the chief executive of id3as, and for a dozen or so years we've been building highly customized, large-scale live video workflows for our customers. What we've been doing for the last 3 or more years is to package that up in a way that our customers and partners can start to build these sophisticated live workflows themselves without needing really in-depth skills that know exactly how one particular media format or codec or container works.
So you did a demonstration this morning, or not a demonstration, you gave an analogy this morning showing a 4-input, essentially, video conference, so to speak, with 110 lines of code, but you pointed out that roughly 90 of those lines were business logic. The remaining 20 or so were the actual programming, so to speak. So it's an SDK that you're
exactly
selling?
That, yeah. So Norsk itself, there's kind of 2 halves to Norsk. We've been spending most of the time talking about the sort of media half. There's also a management half that will create cloud infrastructure for you and sort of get to the business of delivering that infrastructure so you can turn the application into live running events. The sort of focus for much of the discussions has been on the media side. And what we feel very strongly is that you typically live in one of 2 worlds at the moment. You're either using something kind of off the shelf, at which point, there's some great off the shelf tools, but you're kind of constrained, your business is then constrained to do what that tool does for you. At the other end of the spectrum, you have basically a roll your own strategy where you go and write a whole bunch of code, and you can then deliver whatever media workflow it is that you might want, but the latter is an enormous amount of effort. I'm really, hundreds of thousands of lines of code, of very specialist skills. And what we see as being the issue with that strategy is you then end up with hundreds of thousands of lines of code and a few thousand lines of business code. And we think that's the wrong way around. The value that I can, that one of our customers can bring to the market is, here's a fantastic workflow, here's a great consumer experience, here's information that makes it relevant and creates a sort of sense of community and a sense of engagement amongst my audience. And that's what's important, not how I package up WebRTC content versus Dash content versus something else. And Norsk, sorry, go ahead.
No. I was going to say, in fact, you described, one of the things you described this morning, and I used it in an interview just a minute ago with somebody who's going to be on a panel called Build or Buy that's happening in a few minutes, was we were talking about the fact that you have the car parts that you could assemble, but you're a sports broadcaster. Do you really need to go into assembling the automobile versus being the best sports broadcaster that you could be?
Exactly.
So will this limit the size of the technology teams that are needed inside the organization?
Potentially. I think more it changes the nature of those teams a little bit more, because at that point you're probably using tools that your team's already familiar with. Sort of highly expressive, business-oriented languages, like TypeScript or Go or Java or whatever, so that rather than having to deal with the minutiae, you're saying, this is how I want things to hang together. And really importantly, it's tools that you probably have within your organization anyway to build your website, to build your CRM and so on and so forth. So what we're taking away is, for the very, very biggest companies, I can see sense in a roll your own strategy right from the ground up. It gives you kind of control and so on, but it's an extremely expensive hobby, it's a very challenging hobby, and it takes a long time. For everybody else, actually being able to get that same value where your team using standard skills, using tools that they're probably very, very comfortable with already, can deliver that same value. And that's where we see the differentiation with Norsk.
And now you've launched 1.0. I guess one of the other questions is, as you see SDKs out there in the market, and you think back even to things like Flash, you had Flash evangelists who went out to say, here's why you do it this way because it's easier than doing it yourself. Will you have to both educate and evangelize the market, or do you think the market is already educated to the pain? They just need the understanding of how to do it easier?
I think I think there is quite a wide understanding of the pain, not least because the pain is reasonably severe.
Okay.
Yeah, it's quite a challenge. And I think there are some good analogies from markets I've worked in the past. So, for example, I started my career in retail IT, and back then, in order to be a large-scale software provider in retail IT, you had to basically write proprietary databases.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
So you'd have a retailer who wanted a sales report, and what they were interested in was the sales report and how quickly they could get it, and that the numbers were accurate.
They didn't care whether
what
you were
the provider
Postgres.
This was the days before Postgres and such like. So they were, the providers were writing B-trees or Patricia tries or keyed files or God knows what. And the cost of entry into that retail space was extremely high because you had to basically employ people comfortable with building databases, with ones and noughts from the ground up. And then it was exactly the arrival of things like Postgres and SQL Server and so on and so forth, which took that and said, actually, we can give you all of that power, and I'm not going to limit, by accepting this power, I'm not going to limit the fact that I can now build this report that I used to be able to build with my proprietary technology, but you reduce the timescales, you reduce the complexity, you reduce the costs enormously.
Right.
And we think that is exactly where the media space is right now, that there's this enormous complexity, and at the moment you can't really avoid it. You either don't address that complexity, or you accept the off-the-shelf tools and what they bring.
And like you said, you don't have to have the people who understand assembler or lower down. You essentially need somebody who's similar to your website developer with the tool sets.
Exactly.
Like that. Okay.
And the valuable bit, that's the important bit. That's what makes this sports broadcaster this sports broadcaster. It's because they understand the community they're addressing. They create a sense of conversation. They create a sense of community within that. We think that's what's there. And the other thing that I think, again, speaks to a large extent against roll your own is what's important is the capability you have and the user experience you offer to your clients. Your clients aren't in the least bit interested in whether you use this codec or the other codec or Dash or HLS or any of those things. They want a compelling user experience, and the less they see the technology, the better.
So one final question. I've built this solution, simply through the SDK. Now I want to replicate it 1,000 times because I have 1,000 events that are very similar, but I also need to make little tweaks on each one of those. How difficult is that process?
Well, again, it's straightforward, and it kind of speaks to the heart of Norsk because it's your code. You have a business rule that says, I need this logo for this thing, so I'm going to reach out to my asset management system and pull that right one in. So Norsk itself will take care of I've got one, now I'd like 1,000, and I'd like to go back to one again. It makes that process really very, very simple indeed. But you just described the client's business rule. I need to be able to tailor all of these differently, and that's exactly the important code. Go ahead, write lots and lots of that, because that's where the value lies.
Very good. Excellent. Adrian is always quite interesting. And again, this is Adrian Roe with id3as launching Norsk 1.0.
1.0, yeah.
1.0, you heard it here first.
Thank you very much.